Hey guys, Pretzelman 945 here. Welcome back to another video. Uh, Today I am reviewing another anime, and that is one that I just finished watching on Friday, which is Sword Art Online. Um, this is the 11th anime that I've watched thus far, counting Pokemon. Um, and to um begin on like a simple like general note. Um I watched this in 10 days. Um all four seasons. Um and it was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed myself with this anime. And to be honest, I really don't understand all the hate it gets, really, because I think that it has absolutely amazing characters and like really interesting ways that it plays with its concept and themes. And the openings in SAO are the best of all the animes I've watched thus far, and second best behind Hunter x Hunter in terms of overall OST quality. So what I'm going to do for this review is kind of break it down by each of the seasons. Um, so the first season was my favorite. But I enjoyed all of them, to be honest. Um, um, so in the first arc, which is the actual SAO stuff, um, this was the best bit in the whole show. Because the idea is so incredibly unique, and all the characters introduced are incredibly likable and very interesting. Um, Immediately within in the first episode, we're introduced to the main protagonist of the show, Kirito. Now, I think Kirito is a uh, great protagonist. I think he's um, very nice to follow, and he undergoes a lot of nice character development. And overall, is a fairly solid character. Actually, a great character, I think. Um, And I like Asuna even more. I think that Asuna is an absolutely fantastic female character. And um, I don't know how clear I've made this stance on my channel, but I I dislike romances in a lot of movies. Like I would probably say like 95% of films and TV shows that I've watched because it always feels like it's sloppy, it's tacked on, it's rushed, it doesn't feel very deserved, or like the characters are too simplistic or underdeveloped for me to feel like there was a justified romance between them. Um, and SAO has one of the best like romances I've ever seen in any uh movie or TV show. Um because and again this is coming from but again the hates like romances in like 95% of all movies and TV shows that I've seen. Um so um like the romance in this was absolutely incredible. It felt absolutely deserved. Um, they gave a lot of very like critical development to both Kirito and Asuna, and and it really made you understand why they connected as characters, which is something that I feel like is missing on a lot of romances, but it's very clearly present here. Um, and then how it also slowly builds up the emotional connection between them, I think is absolutely fantastic. Um, so moving on past that point, it's gonna be a bit disorganized, but I'm gonna try and like go through by August. I'm gonna try and organize this. Um, I think that uh the absolute best quality of this show is being able to introduce side characters that are extremely compelling, go through a lot of incredibly well written development, and ensure that these characters are used in effective ways to make them not feel useless. Like they play actual important roles and even sometimes get even more development later on in the story. Uh, so that's kind of like a large general point that I'm going to be touching on as I discuss every one of the arcs in this review. Um, and within the first season, there are a couple side characters that are noteworthy. Um, Klein, especially in season one, but also kind of throughout the entire show, he is not the most like he's an extremely simplistic character, but he's kind of like the funny best friend character, and I think that trope really works for Klein across the entire show. Um, Sachi is a really interesting character because I really like the trope that she's just like a coward and she relies on the guild and specifically Kirito and how she feels useless. I think that's a really interesting like angle to take things from. And then Silica is an also especially fascinating character because it's really interesting how like um and I'll get to the themes probably uh after the side characters, but I think I'm kind of doing this on the fly. Uh this is not gonna be the most organized review I've ever done. I really think it's interesting like this virtual like younger sister older brother relationship that's developed between Silica and Kirito um throughout the course of the show. Um, and in general, I think all the side characters. Um, and then there is a Yui as well, which um was an extremely interesting idea for a character to be an AI that is essentially was treated like a virtual like child, so to speak. Um, my one point, I guess, that you could say about this about this first arc is I really feel like it should have been longer. Like, I don't mind ALO or Gun Gale Online. That's a bit of a separate discussion. Um, I don't really mind those things. However, I feel like, considering that SAO is like the name of the show and the initial premise of it, um, I feel like 14 episodes was not necessarily enough within SAO itself. And I feel like they should have spent a lot more time. Like, I feel like they maybe should have just made the entire first season specifically, specifically about SAO and not SAO and ALO. Um, Specifically because the jump between them kind of feels jarring because you're still used to things happening within SAO, but then they're different and back to normal within ALO in that characters don't literally die in real life when their in-game character dies. Um, so, but beyond that, that's really like the only flaw that I have, with this particular arc. Um, so moving on, um, uh, I think I'll cover the theme near the end. Yeah, I'll cover that near the end. Moving on to the ALO section of season one. Um, it's okay. Um, I don't think it's as good as SAO in the beginning, but there is some really like good stuff that came out of here. Um, and I realize I might not be sounding all that positive, but believe me, I loved this anime to death. And for me, what came so much out of it is just like the enjoyment that I got watching episode to episode, which that kind of thing, especially with this kind of show, is kind of hard to describe um, in a review specifically. So, I just want to get that general point across. Um, I should have thought for a second. So then we get into ALO, and this part's pretty good, I would say. It's not as good as the SAO section. I still feel like that should have been longer. Um, because compared to like all the unique concepts that are introduced in SAO specifically, it kind of feels like they did take a bit of a simpler route with the way that they portrayed ALO. Um, so that aspect of it was like neither here nor there necessarily. Um, Immediately, I think the concept of fairies is kind of interesting. Um, it's um, kind of having a hard time. Okay, let me start over. Basically, the setting for ALO is a bit simplistic, but it's interesting enough. Uh, that's so much work in its version of what I just tried to say. Um, so, so there's one major side character in this particular arc that I really want to talk about, and that is Lifa, aka Sugu, um, his Kirito's younger sister slash cousin, because basically if you haven't seen the show, he's actually Kirito's cousin, but they're basically brother and sister because they've grown up together that way. Uh, so um, the character of Lifa is really fascinating because she clearly takes a liking toward Kirito, and she has no idea that Kirito is actually her bigger brother. Um, and obviously, when that twist happens, it's kind of nuts. Um, and as this part of the season slowly goes on, we find out that Sugu is in love with her brother slash cousin, which I got to admit I found completely nuts. Um, like that is just absolutely bonkers. Um, excuse me. Um, and and admittedly, they barely acknowledge it as much. Um, but I think the way that part of her character is developed and her love for her big brother eventually as a sibling, like um when the show progresses, I think is extremely effective, and I think it works really well. Um, Overall, just like crazy plot twist and like really well developed character in Sugu. Um, and then we get to season two. And the first half of it is the Gun Gale stuff. Um, First off, I think that I think the concept of a gun-related MMO when we just had like two others about swords is actually a nice change of pace. And I think it's very on point for Kirito to use a proto sword. And I think like the application of like the sword and different types of guns and combat is actually really interesting. Um, Although I do feel like there is better usage of this in later seasons. Um, for its introduction into Gun Gale, it's still interesting. Death Gun is a completely goofy villain. And he literally just like says, "I have Death Gun," um, and just like shoots at the screen and some ridiculous garbage like that. But I will admit the murder mystery aspect of this to where like um Kirito has to find out like how the people in the real world are dying by being shot in the game. I think that part is actually kind of interesting, and it's kind of like the main plot movers throughout this. Um, this part, I think, just like the ALO part, is like it's solid. Um, I will say though, Sinon is an absolutely fantastic character. Um, because number one, her backstory is incredibly dark and very intense. And the fact that she literally had to shoot a man and she was shunned and like has panic attacks about guns. Um, and the fact that she plays a gun-related MMO, I think like the irony contrast there is such a unique like twist on a character, and it's extremely well executed. That like there's like different aspects of her character, because it leads us to this serious conflict that she has to overcome. Um, Obviously, she ends up liking Kirito because in this show, Kirito basically has a whole harem of like 8 women across the entire show. Um, and um, I think it's interesting the relationship that develops between them as Kirito helps Sinon gain her confidence slowly but surely, like he seems to help every character develop. Um, which is one thing I'll say is probably a bit of a negative about Kirito as a protagonist. That was my speaker turning off. Uh, Ignore that sound. I think it just like connected my computer or something. But anyway, disregarding all that, that's completely pointless. When we introduce Sinon or Shino, as her name is in real life, we find out that she's actually being extorted for money by using the gun threat, which is um, very messed up and cruel, and it's a very and it serves as a very real example of the kind of trauma that Saint did actually undergo. Um, and I think that the way that slowly gains her confidence is very like I don't know what the word is to describe it, but like you definitely want to cheer for her as she like manages to do this, and uh that part of it can be very satisfying. Uh the ending. The ending was completely nuts. Basically she has this like very close friend. Um I forget what his name is, but it turns out that he's actually like one of the ones that was like switching between playing the game versus like killing, and we find it's actually a set of three people, a brother and two pair of brothers and two other, and one of the younger brother happens to be Shino's really close friend, um, who then in the last episode ends up getting like creepily romantically obsessed with her and literally trying to sexually assault her, basically, which is very creepy and it's also kind of cool to watch because it's like shock factor turned up to 11. Um, and then Kirito shows up and obviously he nearly dies and all that nonsense. Um, um, and that whole scene was just incredibly shocking and kind of insane. And I also think that the way the laughing coffin bit, like that's a nice bit of exposition that ties back to SAO, that kind of threads the plot together. How they're basically hunting old SAO players. I think that's really, really interesting. And I will say one thing this show does really well is it makes like meaningful connections to previous arcs in meaningful ways. Like this, for example, the laughing coffin thing I just mentioned. I think that yeah, that about sums up my thoughts on that. Solid arc, but not the best. Um, and then we get to uh like where things like take a serious like jump up in quality from being good to absolutely amazing and like rivaling the best moments from season one in Alicization, aka season three. Uh, because man, this is a good season. So this is like 6 months after a whole Gun Gale Online stuff, and we learn that Kirito is basically doing part-time work for this mysterious company called Wrath, of course, involving all sorts of like new types of AI technology and all sorts of fancy stuff like that. Um, uh, I just realized I forgot to talk about something in ALO, um, which think I'll bring up at the end. Again, this is a very disorganized review. It was the main positive thing. Um, I'm just actually going to switch gears for a second. I missed something in SAO, or the Alfheim arc, the first one. Um, because the second one is kind of forgettable, to be honest, because not a whole lot happens. It's just basically like they complete some quests in Alfheim. It's not super interesting. Um, it's entertaining enough to watch, but the main character that I wanted to talk about was Yuki. Uh, and Yuki is quite possibly one of the two best side characters um that are introduced in this show. And um this particular part of it is what makes me love Asuna like a lot more. Um, well, never mind. That was in season two. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Never mind. That was in season two. So I'm actually kind of on. If you're still watching, thank you. This is an extremely disorganized review. Um, uh, but Yuki is a character that's introduced and is basically like this ultra like crazy warrior that basically looks for someone to beat her in exchange for this like really fancy sword skill, supposedly. So Asuna fights her, and she basically like deems her worthy, and because basically her and her friends are looking for someone to join their party, and um, right off the bat, I think that like the way that they set it up is like, they're not going to have time. They want to make one last really good memory by defeating a boss. I think that that's really, really nice. Um, and obviously Kirito comes in and like defeats all the other guilds that are in their way. But like the friendship that develops between the two of them is equally fascinating. Um, and then my pants for a second. Um, and then basically, after they defeat the boss, like they get the name of the thing, like woohoo, yay, celebration all around and stuff like that. I really love the way that Asuna's character develops, by the way. Um, within this, it's kind of it's crazy. It's really, really well done. Asuna's character development in this section. Um, But she manages to find Yuki in real life, where she learns that she's basically like being kept alive just barely and she has AIDS. Which, side note, I love that it was actually like AIDS is a particular disease because I think during the time when that was made, I'm not actually sure how like serious of a thing it is now, but like back then, I'm pretty sure it was a lot more serious thing. And so that particular commentary on that disease is like very, very intelligent writing, I think. Just wanted to point that out. A little detail I noticed. She manages to find Yuki in real life in the hospital, and they basically make it figure out to where she can do the thing that Yui does with like the mechatronics thing on the shoulder or whatever. Um, and and all that stuff and just like watching the two of them like grow closer as like Yuki like goes to school and like visits her old family home. It's like very emotionally powerful stuff that's like it really makes you resonate with the character itself. Uh anyway, so that was the one like extra thing that I wanted to talk about. So now moving into Alicization. Um I'm gonna kind of speed this up a little bit. Basically, we were thrown in. Kirito's working a part-time job, and he's going to travel to America with Asuna, but then he gets attacked by the one member of Laughing Coffin, which is a nice, meaningful connection to the Gundiel stuff from season two. Um, and basically, he almost dies because of the whole like injector thing or whatever. Um, and so he has to go into the STL um, with a lot of exposition about what that is, um, and whatever. I will say, actually, even though there is a lot of exposition dump into what the STL is, how flux lights work, and specifically what Alice is and the goal of Alice, the AI in general, I think is like really it doesn't feel uh like it doesn't feel just like an exposition dump. It's interesting enough and meaningful enough to the plot that it doesn't feel like useless information, and it's not all like there at once to where it feels like a lot of information that really dulls the pacing. Um, which is not something that everything that has an exposition dump will do necessarily. That's something that Hunter x Hunter did a few times that made the story like at times a little bit hard to digest. Um, but beyond that, but like honestly, SAO special allocation does it really well. Um, so immediately he gets dropped off in the world, and he meets Yujiro, um, who is my favorite of the side characters that are introduced. Like Yujiro and Yuki are the two best ones, but I think Yujiro just barely takes top spot for me. Um, because I absolutely adore the friendship that develops in them like chopping down the tree and slowly like learning sword fighting skills and becoming their own like and slowly developing their own unique styles, even as Yu-Gi-Oh develops parts of Kirito's style, and especially how that like develops as they go to the sword fighting academy. I think that's some really entertaining stuff right there, and like all the rivalries between them and things like that and like their mentors are really interesting in how they eventually mentor other students. Um, I also like the relationship between the two of them. I think that's really interesting. Um, until eventually, like they basically have to like stop these two complete douchebags from literally sexually assaulting their apprentices, and they end up like chopping their arms off and all this stuff, which is basically like taboo because like this entire world follows the taboo index and the absolute authority of the pontifex and the axiom church and the power of the nobles and all this stuff. Uh, and I think that this season does a nice job of actually balancing the underworld with the real world in terms of like delivering exposition and as to what's happening within both worlds, essentially. Um, So eventually Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito, because they want to find Alice, they have to break into the cathedral and defeat tons of like the Integrity Knights. Uh, and number one, I think the different abilities of all these knights are really, really awesome and cool. Uh, that they fight through and all that. And I think like the amount of unique twists in their abilities is super, super interesting. Um, I also like Cardinal as a character, and the very interesting role that she plays with Administrator, um, as the main villain, how she wants to stop her. I think all that stuff is really, really interesting. Um, so as they make their way through, they eventually encounter Alice, who is freaking awesome as an Integrity Knight, like super super cool abilities and everything. And then obviously, like as they're climbing up the side when they're like blown out, Kirito and Alice have to like basically make a truce, and that's where the whole bonding part happens. Um, and this is where Alice becomes a great character as well, um, because uh, like just like the other Integrity Knights, she has to learn the truth behind them and how they're not real and how they have their memories wiped. Uh, and I think the way that her and Kirito's relationship uh, is built is very, very nicely done. Um, and how they have to like work together essentially to fight off the people and everything like that. Very, very entertaining to watch. Sorry about that. Had to deal with something real quick. Um, Alice, that's where I was. So, I think I explained how I like the character of Alice. So we're moving on to the next Yu-Gi-Oh thing. Hercule is my favorite of the Integrity Knights because I really like his attacks, and I think that his backstory is the most unique, and I really like the fight between him and Yu-Gi-Oh. I think it's super super interesting. And then we're introduced to probably the most annoying character in all seasons, Prime Senator Chudelkin, who is like this weird clown dude that honestly is grating, and I don't like him very much. Um, and so basically, then this comes with a crazy plot twist of Yu-Gi-Oh basically becoming an integrity knight, essentially. Um, and I really like this particular part of Yu-Gi-Oh's character because the entire point of his character is how he like overcomes weakness and how he looks up to Kirito as an example for that. And I think it's really interesting to like turn on that to like basically him succumbing to his weakness and desires by like succumbing to the temptations of administrator and his own weakness by uh association. Uh and I think the fight between him and Kirito is absolutely fantastic, and I really, really enjoy it. And eventually like the way that he eventually regains himself via Alice is super super fascinating, really interesting stuff there. um the only thing after that is probably talk about the finale. um I think um I think the finale's good. I like the fight against Administrator, first between her and Cardinal. I think that's some nice, like, juicy rivalry stuff. And then like Yu-Gi-Oh's sacrifice is so absolutely like soul crushing. And to be honest, I really wish, kind of like Hughes from Fullmetal Brotherhood, he didn't die. But not quite to the same level, I don't think. Um, but I was very sad when Yu-Gi-Oh died, but his sacrifice was incredibly meaningful and powerful, and really helped develop Kirito's character. Um, so obviously Kirito defeats Administrator. Then we get into the war on Underworld stuff, and basically this team of people has invaded um uh the ocean turtle thing, and they're after Alice's Fluctlight. So that's kind of like the thing that's moving the plot forward. Um, and I think it's interesting. I don't know how necessary an entire like exploration into the different races and cultures of the Dark Territory necessarily was in this, but I mean that's like neither here nor there, I suppose. Basically, like the main bad guy, Gabriel, and his right head honchman, the last member of Laughing Coffin, like Masago, I think his name is, ends up like logging in on like the Dark Knight and the Emperor Vecta accounts and stuff like that. Hmm. And uh, and by association, they end up leading the Dark Army as they're trying to find Alice's Light Cube, and this eventually like leads to a war between them. Um, Um, I didn't like this arc as much as some of this part, as some much as some of the other ones. Like Alexation was, it was still good. Um, but I think it's just kind of like it's not near the quality of Alexation. I think. Um, and the war itself feels like very standard. Obviously, there's very exciting action and things like that, and very like meaningful duels to various characters. Um, I think the character of Gabriel as a villain is actually kind of interesting, in his creepy past and how eventually at the end that like ends up, and the irony of his like demise is actually pretty interesting. I don't like him as much as Administrator in terms of a villain, I think, but he's serviceable for the plot. Um, uh, and then of course we get to the complete pandemonium part where the American players start coming in. Um, I have to say, I cringe. I watched this in sub, and I cringed very hard at like the American accents, as like the Americans bought the game. But that's just a very minuscule detail, mostly unimportant. Um, so obviously the whole war stuff happens, then all of his friends showed up, but then there's so many American, Chinese, and Korean players, and they get like slaughtered basically. Um, until it's like this heroic last stand thing, until where uh the only way out is to like basically uh get to the World's End altar with Alice in tow. Um, However, Kirito and Asuna don't make it in time. But I love the little detail, like I love their romance. It's one of the personally positive things across every arc in this show. And I really, really like how the fact that they choose to stay behind, and also the fact that it doesn't really dive much into like the 200 years um that they work together. I think that's very intentional and very positively so. Alice's introduction to the real world is very well handled, I think, and overall, Alicization in general, it goes from like MMOs in general to like VR to like AI specifically in general, and I love the social commentary that it makes about like the role that AI can play in society and the character of Alice and how Alice represents that. I think all that is really great. Um, and in general, the big theme that I was alluding to earlier, and definitely one of the most positive aspects of the show that I'm going to finish off with, I'm going to review with, um, is this like being unable to differentiate between like what is real and what is not. And this is permeating in like so many different aspects of the show, whether it be like the family dynamic between Kirito, Asuna, and Yui in the first season, to like Sinon's trauma in season two, dealing with like the guns thing and whether it's real or not, um the Sugu's romance, romantic aspirations and stuff like that. So huh, uh to specifically with the underworld in particular, and in like the difference in having to explain like what a real worlder is versus a person that versus a fluctuate that is automatically generated in the underworld is uh crazy. Um and I really like that main theme that permeates throughout all of the show. Okay, I realize that this was an extremely disorganized review. If you watched all the way through, thank you. I appreciate it. Overall, really great show. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I realize it might not show as if I'm talking about it in the most positive way compared to like my Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood review, for example. Um, but genuinely, like the like 99% of the enjoyment that I got from this was just watching like episode to episode more than anything, I think. Um, and like I said earlier, that kind of thing is just kind of like hard to necessarily like concise into a review. Um, so yeah, currently in my anime rankings, it's ahead of Demon Slayer and behind Dragon Ball Super, so sitting at number 7. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all later. Bye!